Hello! Well, I'm tinkering around with this coffee machine a little bit, and I've discovered you can get all these other buttons that go in it for things like a flat white, espresso macchiato, decaf. Why would anybody want a decaf? Chai latte? No idea what that is. Oh, soup. Tell you what, John would like that actually. Maybe we can put that one in. All manner of wonderful things, but there seemed to be something missing. So I decided I might have a bit of a delve inside the machine, and I may have done that. Wires everywhere, circuit boards everywhere. I ended up with only one washer left at the end, which is quite good going. I mean, normally there's a good few nuts and bolts. But on the plus side, we now have a coffee machine with a Bovril button. Anyway, enough of this Bovril coffee-based nonsense. It's episode 110 of Retropower Uncut, so let's do this. Okay, we'll start with the Morris. So actually quite a lot of visual change on this. The owner was actually in today for the first time since it was just a bare metal, basically since dry build, so when it was a bare metal rolling shell. Just happened to be in the area, so he had a look around it, and because we knew he was coming, we thought we'd get the interior. We're pretty much on the brink of getting all the interior in for the final time anyway, but we thought we'd do a dry run of getting all the interior in, see if there were any issues with that at the same time. Kill two birds with one stone. So it's actually looking very together in the inside at the moment. And it's great to see it, because obviously we've kind of visualised what it's going to look like, and we've had all these various components for a while. Everything's been leathered, we've had all the bits on the shelf, but this is the first time we've just put everything together. And it's just awesome to see it, you know, it's to sort of see the vision coming together. So although some of these things are in quite loosely, like the air vents aren't fully home, stereo's not quite in its proper place, obviously the gear stick's going to have a bezel and a gator and a different knob on it, and there'll be various other changes in there. Fundamentally, we're seeing the overall look for the first time. The door panel's obviously not upholstered yet. There's going to be, I think, a line of the light grey leather, like piping along the middle of the dash to split that up a bit, and then that will flow into the door card, down at the angle of the armrest, then straight back into the rear card, up, and then into the centre of this rear section that houses the subwoofer. And we've got to do a boss on the steering wheel, because we didn't realise how much dish there was on the original MX-5 wheel, so when that was mocked up for driving position, it was great. Now with this wheel, which we love, it's miles further forward, so we've got to put a deeper boss on that to get the driving position right. But other than that, yeah, looking great. And as I think you saw last week, it's now, you know, starting up under its, you know, literally everything electrically. It's ready to go. You can just fire it up. It drives. We've moved it around in here. The brakes work. So really, we're very close to being able to actually use it. Main thing stopping the build of the doors is we're just waiting for the mechanisms that are in here that hold the revised door handle pivot / latch mechanism. They're being 3D printed in aluminium. So we're waiting for those before we can finish the door build, get the frames and the glass in, and then obviously the upholstery bits have got to go away to be leathered. But yeah, it's just great to see it. It's a huge sort of morale boost, if you like, you know, having slaved away for so long to see everything come together like this. So that is great. Mustang. We've been on with the upgrades on the power steering and brakes. We mentioned last week I went for the first drive in it, which was generally good, but some of the original parts weren't really up to scratch, so we didn't like the early style power assisted steering setup. That's now been swapped for the later Borgeson type steering box, power steering box. So I think that's actually 100% done. We've put a servo on the brakes, that's all done. I think Adam's just doing the final touches on that now. We also did some tweaks on the exhaust manifolds. When we were running it, we noticed it was just blowing a bit around the exhaust manifold flanges, and they're just quite warped from where they've been made, so we've linished those flat to get the mating face flat, so hopefully that will solve that at the same time. So I think actually we're probably a day away from being back to the point of driving this. And then we're getting around to doing the refurb on the wheels, so we've got these fetching yellow space savers on it at the moment, which we all agree strangely looks good. Can't explain how a Mustang on yellow Space Savers looks good, but somehow it does. Go through here. Nothing major on the mantle. We're basically waiting for the gearbox rebuild at the minute. We've just had the casing back, which is actually under there, from the gearbox rebuild place, so we could bead blast the casing, paint the cast iron section of it, and that lot will go back to finish that rebuild. E-type. We're basically going through the early phases of refurbishment on the parts to get it rolling. So Adam's been working through what parts we've got from the owner, what refurb processes need to be done on those, what bits we need to buy because they need replacing, what bits we need to buy because they're missing. And then we've been having a few chats back and forth also on upgrades for it. He's quite keen for, although we want to keep it reasonably true to what an E-type fundamentally is, not like the other one we're doing, which is quite radically modified. He does want on this to upgrade things where there's a worthwhile upgrade to do. So for instance, we're talking about doing individual throttle body injection instead of the carbs on it, so it's fuel injected. We're going to do power steering using the same Mondeo steering rack setup that we've used on the other one. Air conditioning. I can't remember what else we've discussed now, but certainly where there are sort of areas we can upgrade whilst maintaining the general principles of the original, that's what we're doing. And actually sort of tying in with that is the fact we've been doing the Dynamat sound deadening on the inside of it. We'll still have the sort of thick sound deadening pads in the footwells that they had originally, but we're Dynamating under that just to give it an additional level of refinement. So yeah, just basically getting ducks in a row and getting parts ordered, ready to crack on with the build of that. Land Cruiser, quite a lot of progress actually, just not visual progress. Bobby's been working on the wiring installation, which is a reasonable sized job. He's got on really well with it. We're actually pretty much ready to do an electrical power up on that. We need to do a map for the Motec PDM that it's running, and then we'll be straight into electrical testing. So most of what Bobby's been doing is installing the wiring loom, getting everything tied up there. We had the radiator back last week and James was just doing the mounts for that. John's now been able to do the top hose fabrication. He's done the radiator bleed pipe. We've also been he's just generally been working on plumbing actually. So we've done the oil plumbing now up to the cooler and the remote filter. The aircon lines in the engine bay, all of that lot I think is now crimped and back on the car. Aircon lines perhaps not back on yet, but imminently going to be. Fuel system inside the car, I think that's complete. I think the vent lines have either been crimped now or are about to be, and that buttons up all of the fuel system. So actually we're kind of homing in quite quickly on a point where we could get the transmission tunnel cover in, the shift cover, which Bobby's been working on, because there's some electrical components that live in there. So the controller for the electric handbrake is in there. There's something else in there as well, I can't remember what. Oh, the diff lock control buttons in there, and the diff lock control relay will go in there. So we're getting quite close to the point where we can get all the fuel tank cover assembly in, get the seat runners on there, get the transmission tunnel in, get the shifters in. And then, as I said last week, Dean's now upholstering the seats. So things are coming together really well on it. I think the next step is going to be an electrical power up and testing session. And then we're waiting on the inlet manifold to be able to get all the engine electrics connected up. Yeah, at that point, pending also an exhaust system fabrication session, which is on the cards. I've ordered all the components for that this week, so I would imagine exhaust fabrication is going to be starting probably next week on that. We'll be really getting there with that as well. So it's yeah, good progress all round. And then actually I missed the Stratos, but we were trying to think what we were doing on that. We had a couple of gremlins to sort. The isolator was playing on the battery isolator, so pulled that apart, found a faulty solder joint on that, and got that back in place. And we're doing some check straps on the rear clam, because essentially I'm nervous. It's on latches which you release from in the car. I'm obviously a bit nervous about a secondary latch mechanism, because if that somehow came unlatched when you were driving, the wind would catch it and probably explode it into 1,000 pieces. So we've done like just a basic strap system on the inside. So you pop it open and it can come open, I don't know, 7 or 8 inches probably, and then you can reach in and basically just undo like a carabiner type clip in there to allow it to open the rest of the way. So James has been on with that, which I think is now done. And the registration's come through, which we've been waiting for a while. So we will be getting some registration plates on it next week, as I said. And we'll be getting extremely close then to the point we can actually get out on the road in that. So that's another exciting one. It's like all the cars are going to be ready for the road all at once. I think in here, that's about it. So, oh, there was one other thing which we didn't mention last week. Jensen CV8. You obviously saw the body last week at KS Composites. Well, those who have been following us for a while will know we were getting a custom glass roof made for that, which arrived last week as well. So it's AGC in France that have made that for us. Looks pretty good. I'm nervous and excited to pop that into the hole in the roof for the first time. So I'm not going to enthuse massively about it until the moment we've actually tried it in the roof and it's a perfect fit and carries on the curve of the roof perfectly. And then I'll save the champagne for that moment. but on that note, I'll hand over to Nat. Don't forget, the shop is fully stocked with mugs, drinks bottles, t-shirts, hoodies. Christmas is coming as it seems when I walk in around the garden centres around here, and all the Christmas decoration displays are out. So yeah, get in the shop and buy some merch, and here's Nat for the second half of the video.
Well, thank you, Cal, and here we are once again in the fabrication shop in what feels like a slightly short week to me because I was a bit poorly at the beginning of the week. Unusually, I wasn't too well, so the beginning of the week was slightly curtailed. However, I'm back now, so all is well. We're going to start with the Project Kuma Mark 1 Escort, where I'm getting archive from the background because Scott's tack welding some panels in the background, so I'm going to try and turn around a little bit. Tom has been working on the dashboard for this car, which is slightly wobbly at the moment, which is more or less a direct replication, or should be a direct replication of the dash for the first of the two cars, the Project 1 Escort. And that's going pretty well. He's getting on pretty well. He's just finished making up the ends, TIG welded those in, got both of those in, panel beaten those, got the welds all beaten out and cleaned back. He's got the centre section all beaten out. I think you saw last week where he was shaping that over the heavy former. He's now got all that welded in, the welds all finished. It's all coming together really quite well. I think the next stage really is going to be to get the lower tube all shaped, get the curves all put into that all sectioned up, welded together, and then get the bottom of the dash all shaped up to wrap around that tube. And at that point, you'll be getting pretty well on with the dash. It's quite a time-consuming job, and it's going a little bit quicker this time than it did in the last time because we've obviously done one already, so it's a couple of steps ahead, and the blanks were cut as well this time. So yeah, it's coming together really well. That is good progress there. And also on this project, I'm going to wander over here and have a glance over here because I've just been doing, as I say, my week's been quite short with being poorly and doing other things, but I've just been getting more or less the final bits of welding done on this. I've literally just got 2 brackets to put on here to put the tension brace link that goes across above the diff that's removable, so the diff can come in and out of the top. So I've just got to put those brackets on, which I've cut somewhere. Here they are. Those brackets there, which basically go, I can't exactly remember which way around they sit now, but basically those brackets which go across there, I've just got to weld those in place. So I've got to do those. I need to find the link that goes across there though in order to do that. So that was what I was about to do about 10 minutes ago, was looking for the link that goes across there and braces the frame up. So yeah, that's all gone okay. Bored the hole through there, made an extra jig plate. Last time I did without it. This time I made an extra couple of jig plates, this big plate that you can see on the bench, and another jig plate, which is laying around somewhere, I've mislaid. But yeah, I made another jig plate that sits on the front here that picks up off the 2 lower wishbone pivot bolts and gives me the hole centre for this diff nose locator. That's the third bush, the diff nose locating bush. Ah, here it is, under this block of wood that's been put on the bench. Yeah, that plate there, which bolted onto the 2 bolts either side, very quick alignment tool to bolt that to so that it all stays square fore and aft because it's very hard. That hole's just drilled with a cordless drill and hole saw through there. So it's quite hard to get the alignment exactly correct. So put the plate on, bolt it on with the wishbone pivot bolts, which are held true to the frame by the rest of the frame. And that was all jigged up prior to doing that. Put those in, it means that that's held dead aligned, can't go out of position, and that's good. And it also holds it in the correct fore and aft alignment, which sets the position of the bush in the nose of the diff. So that's all good. And then further to that, the guys have just been removing the other subframe from the other Mark 1 Escort to extract that temporarily. We're going to put it back in with the actual poly bushes in it now, because we wanted to extract, if I can find one out, they're a bit beaten up looking now, but these aluminium solid bushes that I made for locating the subframe in the car. While we do the fabrication, we use solid bushes in it so that there's no movement and it aligns the brackets exactly accurately in the car. So we needed I didn't really want to have to make another set of 8 of those, so we've just taken those out of the other frame. We'll put the poly bushes in that one while the car's finishing dry build, and then we can use these solid bushes in this frame while we do the fabrication work in the back of the second Mark 1 Escort project, Kuma there. So that's where we're at on all of that lot. Behind me, amongst this carnage where I'm going to walk around and not get arc eye, I'll come around to this side so I can gesticulate at pieces of E-type and Gaz. Gaz is just removing some of this superbly adherent paint. The car had been repaired in the USA, and I'm not quite sure what prep had been done before the primer was put on, but not much. And a lot of the paint was just flaking off. And while we're not going to be using any of the paint, we do need to do quite a lot of filler work. As we explained last time round, we're kind of turning this bonnet into a book. So we've built these sections here from profile sections cut using the CAD that you've seen in previous episodes, using the CAD design that George has done. We've then cut these sections on the CNC plasma. We've laser aligned where they go on the bonnet. We've then cut the sections of the original car out, put those in, and then tacked all these little sections in just to give us a basic. It's kind of like a wire frame, but accurate to our CAD model. So then we've got a substrate for basically applying loads of filler to, because we're now going to basically filler. We were going to use foam, but we don't actually need any foam now. Doing it this way, it's all much more rigid than trying to use foam. We're just going to build the shape now in filler using the top of these as a guide. So we'll do all the rough work using the top of those as a guide for blocking. And then once we've got it accurate to that level, then we can do spray polyester surfacer over that. So we bury those with that, so we lose those and they're not affecting the sanding anymore. And then we can blend it all out from there. But the problem we've got is, as I say, this primer is barely adherent to the bonnet. Obviously now Gaz is now finding loads of bits that are adherent, but most of it didn't seem to be very well adhered. The problem is we've got to put filler over it. If all that filler comes off at some point further down the line while we're getting the mould made from this, it's an absolute disaster. So we want to try and get it cleaned off as much as we can so that we've got a pretty good chance of the filler that we put on staying attached to it, because it's got to stay attached, as I say, through the process of taking the mould from it, so that we can progress with the carbon fibre version. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. Scott, as you can see by the amount of welding going on the other side, is just literally tacking in. There's no finesse to the job at all. He's basically just very quickly wheeled up a very rough and ready patch panel to blank off the original air intake, because that's been done in an entirely different way, and we don't want that in the book. We'll add that as a separate carbon panel that's cut into the final mould. Well, no, into the final part. That air intake will then be cut in as a separate moulded piece. So at the moment, for the book for this, we just want that completely blanked off. Same with all the other holes. This was a USA spec car, so it had the bumper iron holes in the front. It's got all manner of various holes in it that we don't want. So they've all been roughly blanked off. There's no point really doing anything too finessed in terms of the blanking, because it's all just going to get fillered over anyway. It's all going to be filled, the whole lot will be filled and blocked and sanded to shape. You can see how well adhered the paint is here now. It's literally just flaking off. But yeah, the whole lot is going to be coated in filler, so you know there's no finesse to the metalwork. For goodness sake, don't think that would be the standard of metalwork we'd be doing on a car that was actually staying in metal. This is simply just to generate a book so that we can get a mould taken from it. I see Steve has just I've just had my cup of coffee brought through. That's superb. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Steve. I have some Roundstone coffee in my new mug that Gaz's parents picked up for me while they were over in Florida. So cheers.
One a day.
I'm down to just 1 cup a day. So yeah, we're all right. We're all right. It's good for you. Moving on. We will, I might actually put the mug down. I do feel slightly silly holding it. I'll put that there for a minute. Oh yeah, it's like an oversized prop. I'm going to lean against this. I'm not even going to attempt to try and point at what we're doing because it's all over the top and inside and I've got to open doors and things. Jamie's got plenty of footage of it. Stu's been carrying on with the bulkhead in the dash. The bulkhead's now looking incredible. I think I probably commented on that llast week, but that's looking extremely good now. The fit of that's all really good. Stu's basically got that pretty much to the point where it's ready to weld in, which has been a very, very, very good piece of metalwork. Now, we might do a few little, at some point in our autofocus series, or at some point in one of our other video sequences we do, we might do a little bit on making that because it's quite a challenging piece of shaping. But he's now moved on to getting the dash structure finished and in place, so that the whole of the bulkhead and dash area is all complete metalwork-wise, because all of that needs to tie in together. As I say, there's kind of the HVAC unit sandwiched in the middle, the bulkhead in front of it, the instrument panel, and navigation screen and all the various other controls all on the driver's, on the passenger compartment side of that. The whole lot sandwiches together and it all needs building together really, and all needs kind of designing together. It's not a car where we've designed everything in CAD first. We tend not to with this sort of stuff. There's always a bit of a balancing act. If we were building 2, we'd probably draw it all in CAD. When you're building 1, you weigh up the design time versus the kind of building it and designing it on the fly time, and actually generally you end up better off doing the designing on the fly if you're only building 1. If you're doing 2 like we are with the Escorts, most of the parts we draw. But as I say, in this case, it's slightly different. Literally every part in it is going to be a one-off. So there's almost no point drawing most of it. But yeah, Stu's working on the dash top, which he's started making that. He's done the support tube for the dash top and got that all ready. I think that's in. I'm just going to glance now. It's not in currently, but I think it has been in. Which is a length of 3/4-inch seamless tubing that's going to support the upper face of the dash and the top of the instrument panel. That'll be a removable piece. And then he's got the lower dash tube in, which is a split tube, which also supports the steering column. The steering column support end of that tube is permanently fitted and triangulated back to the bulkhead and to the as I say, the main dash support tube and the bulkhead support tube. It's at the bottom of the upper fabricated section of bulkhead. And then there's a bolt-in section that goes from there across to the passenger side that supports all the lower dash and is removable, just to make it easier to get all the HVAC in and out. So otherwise everything's incredibly tight. We know from doing the Project Utah Jaguar before that the dash area is so tight. There's no space for anything. So it's quite a challenge getting everything into that space. So the more removable you can make the surroundings, the better. So Stu's done a lovely job of that. Made the bolt-in sections all with crush tubes in and step sections of tube that interlock, and it's quite a beautiful piece of work really, the way it all comes together. And it'll all stay neatly aligned. There won't be any, because there's thinking ahead to things like we don't want any of these joints to creak. As the body shell flexes, and it will flex. These are pretty flexible shells. It's not going to be a particularly rigid body shell. Doesn't really offend us too much. That it's not a sports vehicle. It's a touring car, not a sports car. But what we don't want is it to creak while it's flexing. So making sure that any bolted joints in things like those parts of the dash supports can't creak against other parts is key to the design. So making all of those joints really solid is quite important, and he's done a lovely job of that. So that's coming on really well. We'll watch that develop over the coming weeks as that gains all of its dash metalwork and the upper bulkhead gets welded in. In the background, I've just caught sight of something Autograss related, so I'll briefly touch on it. I'm conscious of not turning this into an Autograss special video every week. But I'm a step further along the line with the Class 7 in that I actually got it last week, but I forgot to mention it last week and I only just got it. The transmission for my Class 7 Autograss cars arrived from Jeff Beresford, GB Engineering, it's a GBZ 2-speed, PDS GBZ 2-speed gearbox. It's a billet machine from billet casing. And it's obviously, as I just said, 2-speed. It uses the plan is the gearbox as was uses FT200 Hewland gears, and they're easy change gear sets, dog engaged, obviously. There was some problems running with the Chevy LS engines, running sort of 500 horsepower through that gearbox, and the shock loads are immense in autograss racing. The traction and shock loads are absolutely incredible, and there's a bit of a problem with braking gears. So there's been a bit of a redesign going on, and the gears are actually sort of in progress at the minute to run a wide gear and a narrow gear, and so make one of the gears wider than a standard FT200 gear and one of them a bit narrower, so that we don't break the gear set. We'll give the gear sets a bit more strength, and the reality is you only need one gear for racing, and the other gear is basically going to be a manoeuvring gear, basically a parking up gear. You gear the car loosely for somewhere in the region of 90-95 miles an hour top speed at your rev limit, and that's it's a quarter mile over, so say about 95 miles an hour at your rev limit, and at that point the engine's so torquey that you only need one gear. You know, the engine's making over 400 foot-pounds of torque basically from idle to the rev limit. It makes a bit more than that in the middle, but it never makes less than 400 foot-pounds of torque, and in such a light car you just basically only need one gear. So the plan is to just run it as a single speed but with a manoeuvring gear, because obviously trying to get it onto a trailer or manoeuvre it around a paddock with in a 90 plus mile an hour top speed gear is a bit challenging, but it will get off the line in that gear. That's been proven. So we're just going to run it basically as a single speed with a manoeuvring gear, and that works well. So yeah, we've got all those parts, so that's all looking nice. Very nice piece of engineering, all made up at Jeff's place up in Nantwich, just outside Nantwich, and we use GB Engineering for our drive shafts, for anything we build with independent rear suspension. Basically, I would use Jeff for the drive shafts for that. Gordon Murray's car, for an example, had GB Engineering drive shafts in it, and both of these two Escorts that we're looking at in here will both have GB Engineering drive shafts in them. He custom makes the shafts to suit the CVs that we've used, and they're just top quality. Never had a problem, so they're really good. So moving on, as the very last thing just to touch on in the background, nothing too drastic going on, but we've got the Project 1 Escort in here. Things are moving ahead on that. The tooling is at the point where we're about to get it machined. I don't exactly know what stage that is at between getting the quotations and actually getting it done. But the tooling the hammerform tooling for the wheel arches front and rear for both cars is in progress. That will be machined from epoxy tooling block. So that's in progress. As I said earlier, we dropped the rear frame out the minute on this one so that we can put the bushes into it, and then we're going to be moving forward with getting the steering column fabricated and work out how to do it. There's quite a lot of detail work with the steering column in terms of the driving position and the steering column versus dash, that sort of stuff. So there's a bit to do there, and then finalising a lot of the details, moving on to finalising a lot of the details to do with the plumbing routing, fixtures and fittings in terms of holding pipes in place, holding wiring in place, holding an aircon compressor, electric aircon compressor in place, holding the aircon condenser in place, all of the sort of detail work basically. Then fuel tank, getting the fuel tank drawn, fuel filler pipe, all sorts of that sort of work. And then we've got to move on to the final bits of panel work that we can't do until the wheel arches are done, and then we get on to all the final underside finishing and stitch welding and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, progressing on, but sort of at a slightly slower pace at the minute until we get a bit further ahead with the wheel arch work. So I think that pretty much, looking around me just in case I've missed anything else, pretty much rounds up where we're at this week. So yeah, see you again next week.